relax while I sketch this little tool. So let's just turn the page and get started. Good morning, good morning, good morning. It is 5:30 in the morning on, why is there no picture? There it is. It is 5:30 in the morning on a, goodness, is it Friday morning? On a Friday morning. At 5:30 in the morning on Friday mornings is when I like to do a little thing where I pull a toy from the toy box, a random object from the Random Object Randomogrifier, if you will, and I draw it and we talk about it. You know what? I've got to focus on that composition, because if I'm not careful, I'll put that whole handle on one end and not leave room for the saw. Let's focus on the composition. But today's toy is a handsaw. Handsaws have been around for about about 50,000 years. That can't be right. 5,000 years. There we go. Let's get our numbers right. 5,000 years. Handsaws have been around for about 5,000 years. Because I saw the zeros and I was like, whoa, that's a lot of zeros. The Egyptians had them 3,500 years ago. Originally made of bone or flint, until they figured out how to make them out of copper. And then they made them out of copper for a little while, and then they made them out of bronze for a little while, and they made them out of iron for a little while. The Romans and everybody figured out how to make them out of iron, but that wasn't any stronger than copper or any stronger than bronze until they figured out until the metallurgy caught up with it. But for thousands of years, that's how saws were made, with handmade, punched out and stamped and cut the blades out of iron or bronze or copper. A guy would stand there and hand chisel every tooth, because it was the only way to get the accuracy. I have to remember this is a toy, and they've attributed some width to the saw blade. I am not going to draw every sawtooth. I know that you want to see me draw every sawtooth, because that would be exciting for you, but I am not going to draw every. I'm going to give you essence of sawtooth. I don't know, I may draw more sawteeth than I intended to. But until they came out with rolled steel in the 1650s, every saw was handmade, with a guy standing there chiseling out every tooth, much like what I'm trying to draw right here. And the teeth are important because the way they're shaped give you two different types of saws based on what your intention are. You've got your basic rip saw, and on the rip saw, the teeth are 90 degrees to the blade, so that they can chisel out a path along the grain of the wood. And then you have your crosscut saw, where the teeth are much narrower, and their goal is to just push the wood out of the way, slice the wood out of the way. If you use the one instead of the other, you will cause your wood to chip away and break. But modern hand saws have combined the teeth so that us simple homeowners don't have to think about that kind of stuff. Good morning, Rick. Good morning, Joe. they stay sharp much longer than the modern. That's true. That the antique ones stay sharp much longer than the others. We're actually going to talk about the distance saw here in a little bit with the way the antique saws our market is going. I actually have some facts about that also. That's interesting to me.
Joe has antique ones from his
Opa.
Yeah.
Yeah, I responded to Joe, but I didn't say I was responding to Joe, so I can see how that would be.
I'm sorry.
No. I was sitting here thinking. Yeah, I'm talking to Joe like everybody knows what Joe said. Joe's in the chat talking about his Opus saw that he inherited and how it stays sharp longer. And I responded to Joe, but I didn't let anybody know that I was responding to Joe. So. The other thing that I thought worth talking about this morning was the musical saw. How up until the 1920s, these things were pretty popular. They peaked in the 1920s, musical saws, and I don't know why. I don't know why. I don't know why it got popular to begin with. They make a really unique, mystical sound, and with the advent of radio, you can see how that sound wouldn't sound like anything else, because I mean it's that wavy. It's really hard to describe what a musical saw sounds like, but it's almost ghost-like, ethereal. But the vertical view is not supposed to change. It's just supposed to show me.
Okay.
Yesterday, all it did was show the item.
Gotcha.
It was stuck on the opening. It was stuck on the opening scene of the rabbit.
I just didn't want an instant replay.
Right.
Sorry, I'm working. So you don't dock my pay.
I'm going to double your pay. I've decided you're way more valuable to me than what I've been paying you, so I'm going to pay you twice as much.
Okay, that's good.
But the musical saws, now they studied musical saws. One of the colleges, I think it was Yale. Do I have? Yeah, the music's on. Can you not hear the music?
No, the song must not be working.
The musical saws were studied by, I don't know if it was Yale or if it was MIT. I didn't write it down, but they studied it, and the math that describes the music that they make is the same math that they use in quantum physics to explain how an electrical charge goes down the edges of an object instead of inside the object. Because when you play a saw, you have to bend it in a specific way to get the saw to make music. And that bend traps the vibrations along a specific route. And the math to describe that is the exact same math that they use in quantum mechanics to explain how the electricity can be trapped on the edge of a transistor. Who sits around and says, let's compare this math? Because about the only way you could come up with that is, the PhD system is such that PhD candidates have to have, if you're going to go for your doctorate, you have to conduct a study about something that's never been studied before in such a way that's never been studied before. Not necessarily a subject that's never been studied before, but in a way that's never been studied before. That's why you get all these studies about the the homosexual sex lives of red beetles in Arizona. Like, you can ask a red beetle if he's homosexual. It doesn't make any sense, but we're all sitting here going, what kind of stupid is this? And the reasoning is because that PhD candidate had to come up with something unique that had never been studied in that way before. And so we all make fun of it, but he may be the next guy that figures out the next level of cancer medicine. But these guys were sitting around trying to figure out what to study, and I guess they came up with, let's study how that S curve controls the sound on a saw, and then they recognized that it was the same math and announced that in their paper. And while we sit around thinking, man, that's useless information, those people may be the ones that develop the communication that allows us to instantaneously talk between Earth and the moon. Who knows? Who knows what they're going to figure out later on after they get their PhD. Because somebody in the 1920s decided that you could take a violin bow and drag it across a bent saw and get a spooky sound. But goodness, this is my favorite part right here. I'm mixing up my Payne's gray, a little bit of burnt orange, a little bit of Prussian blue, a little bit of cobalt blue, just a touch of black, not so much black. What?
It just says that the rakers on his antique saws are different also.
What are rakers?
Yeah. I don't know.
Joe, what are rakers? What do you mean when you say rakers?
It's above my pay grade.
Right? When they sit around and they think up stuff like, let's study saws, let's study beetles. I get the idea of sitting around coming up with things to study. My current idea of things to study is I want to know why we can't use the heat from data centers, the excess heat from data centers, to run desalination projects on the coast. We've got down here in Corpus, they have a water shortage, and they're having a protest about the data centers going in because the amount of water and electricity the data center is going to use. And so they're protesting the new data centers going in. And Texas has put a moratorium on new data centers going in. They're having conflicts about this all over the country. And my question is, one, why aren't we burying the data centers so that they don't use as much electricity for cooling? And two, why aren't we trapping the heat from the data centers to use to drive something else like desalination? And so that would be, currently, if I were running for a PhD, if I were a PhD candidate, that would be my emphasis of study. I sit around and think about stuff like that all the time. The tooth that pulls the shavings out is the raker. Gotcha. Gotcha. The tooth that pulls the shavings out is the raker. Had no idea. I have to cool my Payne's gray down just a little bit. I have a warm light, so I want a cool shadow. You got a cutter tooth than a raker. Yeah, I get it now. I just wasn't aware of the terminology. So anyway, back to our saws. Now we have some new terms. Rakers. You have a cutting tooth and a raker tooth.
Cutter sets at an angle and the raker is not.
That's right. The cutter sets at an angle and the raker pulls the shavings out. The teeth are set at an angle. Every tooth is set at an angle to the saw blade so that the saw doesn't get stuck. That's on purpose, because otherwise the width of the cut would be the same as the width of the saw, and you wouldn't be able to get your saw back out of your cut. In 1833, a fellow by the name of Henry Diston left England for America and started the Keystone sawmills. Now, the Americas, the rolled steel from Sheffield and the saws from Sheffield dominated in England, dominated the world, even the Americas, because, like in the Americas, it was illegal. There were so many fees and stuff attached to making saws, and in order to compete with that, they finally got tariffs. They had to have tariffs installed so that the Sheffield saws wouldn't dominate the American market. And it worked. It allowed more of the American saws into the American market. And then this guy Diston comes along in 1833, and by 1872 he had established the Keystone Saw Works in Philadelphia. Let me dry this real quick. We'll talk more about Henry Diston on the other side. The fun thing about the Keystone Saw Works is that in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they had 4,000 employees, and they were creating 9 million, at their peak, 9 million saw blades a year. And Henry, and you can praise him for this or you can criticize him for this, because it was a pretty common practice where the founder of a company builds a town to support his factory, and then sets all the employees up in the town, and everything seems happy and healthy from a modern socialist point of view, except for the fact that the money you make in that town is the factory money, and it's only spendable at the factory store. And so you're kind of trapped. You have a house, but if you quit your job, you lose your house. You have an income, you have a nice income, but you can't spend it anywhere except in town. And then if you go to exchange the company money for regular money, the exchange rate is such that you're going to pay 20% exchange fees. But Henry Diston did buy the Tacony neighborhood in Philadelphia and build it up, put a church, put schools in, and set it up for his workers to have a community near the factory. We have a similar thing down here in Sugar Land, where they did the same thing in Sugar Land. They set up a whole town just for the sugar mill. And the coal miners were notorious for doing it. But maybe it was a good thing. Maybe it was good intentions. But the fact that you couldn't, it kind of trapped the employees into the situation. I'm not a fan of that. But he did build the town, the neighborhood up in the Tacony district of Philadelphia. And today that area is set aside. It's mostly a ghost town now. But today that area is set aside as an historical district. They don't produce. There's somebody else bought the sawmill or bought the saw production. It's not a mill, but they bought the saw production, and they don't make anywhere near the 9 million saws a year. They make more like 2,000 saws a year, and some other specialty equipment. And they only have a couple of dozen employees compared to the 4,000 employees that he had at the peak of his organization. I forgot the shadow inside the saw blade there. But they were huge on quality. They were absolute fanatics about quality. Let me dry this real quick, and then we can ink it. Pamela's talking about last night. I was supposed to broadcast, and I wasn't able to do it because I was having some back issues. And I got to tell you, if I had to dance like that today, like my video right there, she said, looks like my back didn't affect my dancing. If I had to dance like that today, we'd all be in trouble, because I am not moving like that right now for sure. Out of ink. Why is that not making a mark? So the quality of these things, and Joe alluded to it earlier, the quality of these things far exceeds what you can buy today. I think I've got some ink issues going on here. Let me trade that out real quick. I'm not saying that you can't buy a quality saw today, but the antique saws, the distance saws particularly, often bring $200 at auction, and not because they're antiques, because the people who buy them use them. The carpenters that buy them argue that you cannot find saws of that quality today. Yeah, that's most people now. But there has been a quiet revolution since the 2000s. There have been an increase in hand tool sales, like hand saws.
Joe says this quality is found today are Japanese. Their push saws are amazing.
You know, those little Japanese hand saws that you see. I always thought it was funny when Norm Abrams would pull out his Japanese saw, because it looks like a butcher knife, a big square butcher knife. But the accuracy and smoothness of that cut You know, I used one once, and the accuracy and smoothness of that cut fully justify owning one if you do a lot of woodworking.
They say push, they cut on the push all for a lot of times.
Yes, I believe that's accurate. Where these saws cut on the pull. Choo, choo, choo. But there used to be, you know, if you think about in the 50s, there was a guy that would be called a tinkerer that would walk around with a cart, pushing a cart down the street, sharpening scissors and saws and knives. You don't see anything like that these days. People don't reclaim tools like that. When your saw gets dull, they throw it away and they go buy a new one. But not if you have a $200 saw. You learn how to sharpen that thing. What is today? The 22nd of May. So there is my version of it compared to the photograph. Let's see what it looks like from my perspective. Well, if I can get my camera to quit moving around. There it is from my perspective. So that's what I did today. Tomorrow, what do we have tomorrow? Oh, it's not that one. That was today's. This is tomorrow. Oh, the suspense. Oh, the suspense. The suspense. The suspense gets everybody. What's going on with the vertical? There we go. Oh, the suspense. It is Ammonite Caesarea. This is a mushroom. And the Caesarea is edible, but it's an edible ammonite. The ammonites, the ones, when you think about the ammonites, they're the ones with the big red top with the little white dots on them that are highly poisonous. But this one is not poisonous. This one is edible. But Claudius's wife snuck a poisonous one into his stack of edible ones, and that is what killed him. So we'll talk about that and more fun mushroom facts as we draw this little fun guy tomorrow morning at 5:30 a.m. Texas time. So you may want to set that notification bell so you don't miss that. But guys, thank you so much for joining me. I really do appreciate it. Again, I apologize for last night, because last night would have been so much more fun than what I was going through. But hopefully we'll be able to do it again. We'll be able to do it next week. But as far as today goes, thank you so much for joining me. I really do appreciate it. Pamela, Rick, Joe. Was there anybody else? Mom, Dad? Everybody else is sleeping. Okay. Guys, thank you so much for joining me. Be sure and tune in tomorrow. Same Artistic Biker time, same Artistic Biker channel. And we dance. We dance until somebody says they see me dancing. Because when they see me dancing, I will know that the lag has caught up with the stream, and I won't have to worry about being cut off mid-sentence, because that's rude. Nobody likes that. We're going to give you a chance to click the clicky thingies this way if you're on the horizontal, or this way if you're on the vertical, so that you can watch another fantastic video just like this one. Everybody gets a chance to say hello and goodbye to each other. But the most important thing